Dearest listener, it appears I, Lady Whistledowns, have returned, quill-sharpened, ink dark as sin, with another scandalous whisper to set London's teacups trembling. They say the season has been uneventful, that no hearts have been broken, no fortunes lost, no vows betrayed. Ah, but those who believe such calm should have attended the Penhurst ball last evening. For beneath the glittering chandeliers of that illustrious estate, I witnessed the swift ruin of a duke, and perhaps the birth of something far more dangerous than disgrace, sentiment. Picture it, marble floors gleaming like frozen moonlight, the scent of roses mingling with the sharper perfume of envy, and 1,000 fans fluttering as though to stir the air heavy with anticipation. London's most polished vipers gathered there, awaiting the fall of one of their own. His Grace, the Duke of Penhurst, that proud and unreachable creature whose fortune was once matched only by his arrogance. Oh, how the mighty tumble when the gods of gold turn their backs. Last night, dear listener, whispers danced faster than waltzes. It began with a single murmur that the Duke's accounts lay empty, that his ships had sunk, that even his servants had fled. And by the time the orchestra reached its second set, the entire ballroom knew that Penhurst had been stripped bare of his riches, his lands gone, his title questioned, his betrothed vanished before the ink of gossip had dried. One might think a man of such stature would storm from the room, but no. Xaden of Penhurst stood like marble carved by divine mischief, his jaw tight, his eyes glinting with something perilously close to amusement. He raised a glass of wine, cheap wine, they say, borrowed from his steward, and toasted to the fleeting nature of loyalty. How the laughter echoed then, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the gilded mirrors that once reflected only his triumph. Ah, but my quill trembled when I saw it, the subtle shift in his expression. There was no anger, no plea for mercy, merely a calm resignation that chilled even the cruelest among us. A duke undone not by war or fate, but by the vanishing devotion of those who once swore everlasting affection. One might almost have pitied him, if pity were not so dreadfully unfashionable in this city of masks. The ladies, once eager to bask in his favour, turned their jewelled shoulders away. The men smirked behind their gloves, pretending to sympathise while secretly counting his losses. Even the orchestra faltered for a breath, the violins hesitating as though unsure whether tragedy or comedy had taken the stage. And there I sat, fan in hand, noting every bowed head, every smirk, every whispered, "How dreadful." Yet what fascinated me most was not the spectacle of his fall, but the composure of the man himself. Xaden Penhurst did not beg, did not flinch, did not offer explanation. Instead, he watched them all as though conducting a grand experiment, and oh, how London loves a man who suffers beautifully. His fiancée, that delicate creature of silks and sighs, was notably absent, her carriage seen fleeing Mayfair long before the first candle was lit. One cannot blame her, of course. Poverty makes a dreadful companion at supper. Still, it was cruel timing, even for the ton, and so the stage was set. A duke betrayed by fortune and love alike, left to bow before a crowd drunk on schadenfreude. But as I watched, pen poised above parchment, I wondered, was this downfall a twist of fate, or a game of his own design? The glimmer in his eye hinted at secrets unspoken, at motives far richer than his current purse. There is, after all, no man so dangerous as one who has nothing left to lose, or so he would have us think. When the clock struck 10 and the final blow to his pride was dealt, a public declaration from the Crown Treasury confirming his debts, a silence fell so profound that even the chandeliers seemed to dim in sympathy. It was then that the courtiers began their slow retreat, leaving behind only the boldest or the most curious. Among them, a handful of women lingered, whispering into gloved hands, pretending compassion. But the truth, my listener, was written in their eyes, the same delight one finds in watching a fire consume another's house, while one's own hearth still burns. Ah, London's mercy is as thin as its ice in March. Still, amidst the cruelty, I confess, there was beauty in his ruin. Pride, when stripped of wealth, becomes a kind of nobility in itself. And Xaden, though undone, carried the air of a man who might yet rise from ashes, if only to shame those who lit the pyre. I must admit, even your ever-cynical chronicler leaned forward as the evening waned. What would he do next, this fallen duke? Beg forgiveness? Flee in disgrace? Or perhaps, and here lies the thrill, turn his ruin into a weapon sharper than any blade? The ball ended without music, the guests departing in a flurry of whispers, leaving Penhurst standing alone in the great marble hall, the last flame flickering in the sconces like a dying heartbeat. He looked up, as though meeting the eyes of every soul who had once adored him, and for a moment, only a moment, I saw something shift behind that proud facade. Not despair, not rage, something quieter, perhaps curiosity. And so, dear listener, I left the Penhurst estate with a heart quite unsteady, for I have seen many a scandal bloom and fade, yet few begin with such poise. London may think the Duke finished, his glory extinguished, but I, ever the keeper of secrets, suspect this ruin is not an ending, but a beginning. After all, even the ton's most ruthless stage needs a leading lady, and something tells me she has not yet stepped into the light. How swiftly loyalty fades when gold turns to dust. Tell me, dear listener, when honour falls, who dares kneel beside it? Ah, my ever-curious listeners, if your hearts fluttered at tonight's scandal and your curiosity burns brighter than the ballroom's chandeliers, then you simply must subscribe, for this quill has many more secrets yet to spill. Now tell me, dearest, from where in this wide world are you watching tonight's tale? Drop your city below, let the whispers travel, for love, scandal, and redemption know no borders. Ah, dearest listener, permit me to draw back the curtain just a little further. A scandal, after all, is nothing without the souls entangled in its making. And tonight those souls are as opposite as the moon and the midnight sea. His Grace, Xaden of Penhurst, and Lady Vivian Hartwell, the woman London barely noticed until she dared to see what others did not. Let us begin with him, a man carved of pride and winter. Xaden's lineage is old, his charm cultivated like fine wine, and his tongue, when he chooses to use it, could cut through silk. But beneath that polished cruelty beats a curious kind of loneliness, the sort that no inheritance can soothe. Some say he was born without the faculty for tenderness. Others insist he simply misplaced it somewhere between heartbreak and boredom. What few suspect, and what I, your faithful chronicler, have recently discovered, is that his ruin was no accident at all. Yes, my listener, the whispers are true. The Duke of Penhurst staged his own fall from grace. Imagine the audacity. A man of fortune and fame, so weary of pretense that he burned his own reputation to see who would stay once the flames died down. It was not madness, though London calls it such. It was calculation, a test, a cruel little experiment to peel the paint off society's masks. He moved with theatrical precision, dismissing staff, selling carriages, appearing in threadbare coats that still somehow looked intentional. When his so-called friends began to vanish, he smiled. When creditors arrived, he welcomed them with wine. And when his betrothed, the diamond of last season, fled into the arms of a wealthier admirer, he lifted his glass to the heavens and muttered, "At last, an honest reaction." Oh, how he must have enjoyed it, watching the ton reveal its greedy underbelly. To see flattery wilt, affection sour, loyalty evaporate like spilled perfume. He thought himself above it all, a puppeteer pulling London's strings. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. Now, to the lady, and what a contradiction she is to our proud Duke. Lady Vivian Hartwell, youngest daughter of a baronet with more books than banknotes, is the kind of woman the ton forgets to notice until it's far too late. Her gowns are modest, her laugh genuine, her mind sharper than the jewels she cannot afford. She is no great beauty by the cruel standards of Mayfair, too sincere in her eyes, too soft in her manner. Yet there is something in her simplicity that unsettles even the most practiced courtiers. I recall seeing her once at a musicale, sitting quietly beside the window while other ladies performed their rehearsed flirtations. She watched, listened, and smiled in that way that makes one wonder what she knows. I dare say, listener, she sees through us all. Vivian has carried a secret for years, one she has spoken to no one, not even her mirror. As a girl, she admired the Duke from afar, the way one might admire a comet streaking across the night sky, dazzling, untouchable, and destined to vanish. When he passed her in the park once, she curtsied too low and blushed too fiercely. He did not notice her then, but she remembered his voice for days. A careless laugh that sounded like music and cruelty in equal measure. Foolish, perhaps, for a woman of sense to love a man of pride. Yet hearts, dear listener, are the worst gamblers in all of London. When news of his disgrace spread through the drawing rooms, Vivian did what no one else did. She believed none of it. To her, the Duke was too composed, too deliberate. "No man loses everything and smiles," she told a friend, unaware that her words were being recounted by yours truly. And she was right. Beneath the ruin she sensed a design, though she could not have imagined how she herself would become part of it. Their worlds should never have collided. He, with his calculated detachment, she, with her unguarded sincerity. Yet destiny, ever the mischievous hostess, delights in pairing opposites at the grandest tables. It began not with a waltz, but with a letter, a summons unsigned, inviting her to the Penhurst estate under the pretence of charity. She went, thinking to deliver aid, to offer sympathy, perhaps even to remind the fallen Duke that kindness still existed in a cruel world. She did not expect to find him alone, standing before an empty hearth, the light of dying embers painting his face in shades of regret. He greeted her not with warmth, but with irony. "Has pity become fashionable, Lady Vivian? I do so hate to be on trend." To which she, trembling but resolute, replied, "No, Your Grace. Pity looks down. I prefer to look across." Oh, listener, the silence that followed could have cut glass. For the first time in years, the Duke found himself disarmed. Her defiance was not loud, not reckless, merely honest. And honesty, in a world addicted to performance, is the greatest rebellion of all. From that moment, the game changed. Xaden had orchestrated deception to expose false hearts, but he had not accounted for one pure soul stepping willingly into his masquerade. Vivian became the mirror he could not bear to face, reflecting not his ruin, but his choices. Every sneer she endured, every whispered insult she ignored, only magnified her quiet strength. And slowly, to his horror, admiration began to bloom where calculation once ruled. How strange that a man who sought to unmask others should find himself stripped bare. And how ironic that a woman who owned so little could give him what all his fortune never bought: sincerity. She never flirted, she never pleaded, she simply saw him. And he, who had staged every moment of his downfall to control perception, found himself at the mercy of her gaze. Even now, London whispers of the contrast between them, the storm and the still water, the proud wolf and the dove unafraid of its claws. Some call it foolishness. I call it fate's most exquisite cruelty. Mark my words, dear listener. This tale will not end as the Duke intended. For pride may craft the stage, but love always steals the scene. And when next they meet before the watching eyes of London, one will learn that truth burns hotter than gold, and the other, that defiance when born of affection is the most dangerous weapon of all. So I ask you, dearest listener, could even you resist such temptation? It was the grandest assembly of the season, though it began with little promise of glory. The chandeliers glittered above like 1,000 captured stars, the air heavy with perfume and ambition. Every titled name worth repeating was present, their smiles painted on, their laughter brittle. Yet beneath the music and murmurs, there lingered the quiet thrill of cruelty. For all of London had gathered not to celebrate, but to witness a spectacle. At the heart of that spectacle stood His Grace, Xaden of Penhurst, the man who had once owned every gaze in the room. His fortune was said to be gone, his reputation in tatters, his fiancée vanished in convenient silence. Still he arrived, impeccably dressed, devastatingly composed, as though ruin itself were merely another suit he had chosen to wear for amusement. He bowed to his peers with the ease of a man unbroken, even as whispers coiled around him like smoke. Laughter echoed from corners. A baroness in crimson leaned toward her companion, her fan fluttering like a dying bird. "A fallen duke," she murmured. "How dreadfully poetic. I wonder what he'll sell next. His pride, perhaps." The remark earned a round of delicate chuckles. The violins stuttered, uncertain, as though the music itself dared not compete with humiliation. Then came the blow. A messenger entered, bearing the seal of the Crown Treasury. Every conversation faltered. The letter was opened, read aloud. The decree was merciless. Penhurst's estates seized, his debts irredeemable, his holdings dissolved by dawn. The court gasped as though the walls themselves had exhaled scandal. For a heartbeat all was still. Xaden's jaw tightened, the faintest tremor of his hand betraying what pride refused to show. Yet his voice, when it came, was smooth, even mocking. "Ah," he said, lifting his glass. "It seems I am now a man of the people." Laughter, sharp, vicious, and delighting in the cruelty of the powerful, filled the hall. Some turned away to hide their smirks. Others clapped as if this were theatre. In truth, it was. London adores a downfall far more than a coronation. And yet, amid the sea of jewelled mockery, one figure did not laugh. She stood near the edge of the marble floor, Lady Vivian Hartwell, modest in powder blue silk, her gloved hands trembling around a velvet purse no larger than her courage. Her eyes met his across the ballroom, and in that moment something unspeakable passed between them. The recognition of a soul that refused to look away when all others had. Without permission, without calculation, she moved. Her slippers clicked softly against the marble, each step defying reason, rank, and decorum. The crowd parted in startled silence. By the time she reached him, the violins had gone still, leaving only the sound of her breath and the pounding of hearts too proud to admit they cared. Vivian curtsied, not as one does before nobility, but as one bows before truth. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "allow me." She opened the small purse and poured into her palm a handful of coins, silver, gleaming, pitifully few. "It is all I possess, but perhaps it might restore Penhurst." Gasps rose like a wave. The Countess of Albury dropped her fan. Lord Stirling choked on his champagne. No one dared speak, for what words could accompany such madness? To offer her last fortune to a ruined duke before the eyes of London, it was not merely scandal, it was social suicide. Xaden stared at her, every practiced line of his composure unravelling. His plan, his grand, cruel test of loyalty, had never accounted for this. He meant to expose the false hearts of his peers, not to encounter a genuine one beating so boldly before him. His lips parted, but no sound came. For one agonizing moment they simply stood there, the fallen duke and the trembling lady, two souls caught in the crossfire of pride and grace. Then, from somewhere behind the crowd, laughter began anew, low, mocking, venomous. Someone whispered, "The poor fool thinks charity will buy her a title." It was that single sentence that struck the spark. Xaden turned, his gaze burning brighter than the chandeliers. And then, with a voice that sliced through the murmur of ridicule, he declared, "Then let it be known, she is my Duchess." The silence that followed was absolute. Every face froze, every breath caught. The orchestra stopped entirely, bows hanging mid-air. One could almost hear the collective gasp of the ton as the words echoed against marble and gold. "She is my Duchess." Vivian's head snapped up, eyes wide, colour draining from her cheeks. "Your Grace," she whispered, shaken. "You cannot." But he did not flinch. His hand found hers, warm, trembling, human, and raised it just high enough for all to see. "London," he said, his tone both challenge and confession, may mock what it cannot understand. But Penhurst bows to no one, save the woman with enough courage to stand before him. The crowd erupted in shock. Some gasped in delight, others in outrage. A duchess born of pity, a lady without fortune, without lineage, declared before the court as his equal. It was unthinkable. And yet, it had been spoken. The Dowager Marchioness fainted. The Viscount of Cherrington demanded a chair. A poet in the corner scribbled the moment onto his sleeve, certain he'd just witnessed the birth of a legend. Vivian's eyes glistened, not with joy, but disbelief. She wanted to protest, to insist that she had meant only kindness, not claim. But his hand tightened ever so slightly, and in his gaze she saw the flicker of something rawer than pride, gratitude, perhaps even awe. He turned from her then, facing the court with a smile that could have melted steel. "You have your entertainment," he said quietly, each word measured and deliberate. "Now take care how long you laugh, for even ruin can be rebuilt, and every jest has its cost." The crowd began to murmur again, louder this time, their words dripping with speculation and outrage. Some swore the Duke had lost his mind entirely. Others whispered that he had chosen this humble lady out of desperation. A few, more romantic, or foolish, wondered if they had witnessed love itself in bloom. But I, dear quill in hand, saw what the rest could not. Beneath the theatrical gesture lay the first tremor of something neither of them yet understood, the spark of a deception that would outgrow its maker. For the Duke it was pride that spoke, for the lady, compassion. Yet from those two opposing hearts, destiny began to weave its tangled embroidery. As Vivian's hand remained in his, she felt the weight of every gaze in the room pressing upon her. She wanted to flee, to disappear into the safety of shadows. But the Duke's thumb brushed the back of her hand, a silent promise, or perhaps an apology, and she stayed. When the orchestra dared resume, it played not the lively waltz planned for the evening, but something slower, almost mournful. Xaden bowed to her. "Shall we, Your Grace?" he murmured, his irony softened now by sincerity. And though she could scarcely breathe, Vivian curtsied, her heart pounding as he led her into the centre of the floor. As they danced, Ruin's Duke and Charity's lady, the ton watched in stunned fascination. Every turn, every step, every glance was dissected and whispered into legend before the night even ended. And so it was that London bore witness to the boldest deception of the season. The fall of Penhurst had been planned, but this coronation of compassion, this accidental union of pride and grace, that was fate's own invention, and thus began the lie that would undo them both. The scandal had settled like perfume upon Penhurst, sweet, suffocating, and impossible to escape. Every salon from Mayfair to Grosvenor Square whispered of it, the proud Duke who had declared a penniless lady his Duchess before the entire court. Some swore it was madness, others romantic folly. But within the ancient walls of Penhurst Hall, where scandal could not reach and silence was its own witness, something far more treacherous than pretense had begun. Affection. Xaden had not meant his words as jest. When he uttered them, it was not to wound London's pride or preserve his own, but because something in Lady Vivian Hartwell's trembling defiance had pierced through the armour of his solitude. The way she had stood before him, fragile yet unbroken, trembling yet resolute, had left him undone. She had offered everything she owned not for gain, but out of something terrifyingly rare, goodness. And now she was here. Penhurst Hall, with its marble corridors and echoing staircases, had never felt so alive. Servants tiptoed about in awe, whispering that the Duke smiled now, faintly but undeniably. The mirrors gleamed once more. The fires burned brighter. The household, long accustomed to its master's solitude, felt the shift as surely as one feels spring after winter. Vivian tried to move through the halls like a guest rather than a wife, yet the staff curtsied and addressed her as "Your Grace." It flustered her, but she accepted it with quiet grace. Xaden watched from the upper balcony one morning as she gave her breakfast tray to a maid too frail to carry it. That small act, unremarkable to most, struck him more deeply than any grand gesture. "Your Grace," she greeted him later that day when they crossed paths near the conservatory, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. "Vivian," he replied, the sound of her name softening on his tongue. "You seem to have taken command of my household. I only wished to bring a little kindness where it might be needed," she said. Then more quietly, "This house deserves warmth again." His lips curved, not in amusement, but something nearer to tenderness. "And what of its master? Does he deserve it too?" She faltered, the question striking too near the heart. "I should think," she whispered, "that even a proud man deserves to feel the sun once in a while." That evening, he could not eat. Days folded into weeks, each marked by 1,000 small collisions, a shared glance across the library, a touch of fingertips as one handed the other a letter, a lingering conversation that outlasted its purpose. Theirs was not the play of false affection that Ton expected. It was something dangerously real, something that frightened them both. When they rode together through the Penhurst woods, he found himself watching the way light tangled in her hair more than the road ahead. When she laughed at something foolish, he said, a sound that seemed to dissolve every shadow in his soul. He realized he would burn the world to hear it again. And she felt it too. At first she told herself it was gratitude, admiration for a man who bore the weight of ridicule without bowing. But late one night, when thunder rolled across the moors and she found him alone in the study, sleeves rolled, staring into the flames as though they could punish him, her heart betrayed her reason. "You should rest," she said softly from the doorway. He did not turn. "And leave my thoughts to haunt the night alone." "You are not alone," she murmured, stepping closer. He looked up then, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the one between them. "Vivian," he breathed, as though saying her name might undo him. "You shouldn't be here." "Then tell me to go." But he did not. The lightning flashed. For one breathless heartbeat, neither moved. Then he rose slowly, his gaze locked with hers. When he reached her, he stopped mere inches away, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath, the tremor he could no longer hide. His hand hovered, trembling, at her cheek, and when his fingers brushed against her skin, she closed her eyes. "I meant it," he whispered, "when I called you my Duchess, every word of it." Her breath caught. "Xaden, say it was foolish," he urged. "Tell me you hate me for dragging you into this farce." But her eyes, when they opened, were not angry. They glimmered with tears she could not explain. "I could never hate you." The words shattered what little restraint remained. He leaned forward, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "Then may ruin take the rest," he murmured, voice breaking, "because I cannot pretend this is make-believe any longer." She might have fled then. A wiser woman would have. But instead, she placed a hand upon his chest, feeling the quick, unsteady rhythm of his heart. "Neither can I," she confessed. He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "You should not trust me," he said softly. "I've lied to everyone I've ever known." "Then start your truth with me," she replied. That night, they parted without another word. Yet the silence between them was no longer empty. It pulsed with promises unspoken, fragile and burning. In the days that followed, the air between them grew heavier, charged with a tension that both longed for and feared. At dinners, their eyes met too often. During walks, their hands nearly touched, but never quite. Even the servants began to sense it, averting their gaze lest they be accused of witnessing something sacred. When word reached them that London still mocked their union, Xaden only laughed. "Let them," he said, pouring her a glass of wine by the fire. "They think this was all a jest." "Wasn't it once?" she teased, though her tone trembled with affection. He turned to her then, his smile fading into something fierce and unguarded. "It was," he said, "until you." Her fingers brushed the stem of her glass, but she could not look away. "And what am I now? The only thing I have ever meant." The confession hung between them, dangerous and undeniable. The fire cracked softly, scattering sparks like the pulse of something forbidden made holy. That night, she stood at her window, watching him in the courtyard below as he walked alone through the moonlight. He looked up once as though he felt her gaze, and for the first time he smiled, not with pride or irony, but with peace. Oh, what a perilous thing, to find sincerity within a lie. They had begun this as actors, yet now the stage had vanished, leaving only truth behind. Every glance, every word, every silence. It all whispered of a love neither dared name aloud, and though neither spoke of it again, both knew that something irreversible had taken root within Penhurst's ancient walls. They played at marriage, until play became perilously real. Would you guard your honour, or follow your heart, gentle listener? It began with a letter, a single envelope sealed with crimson wax and carelessly tucked behind a portrait in the Penhurst library, a relic of vanity half forgotten by its master. But fate, it seems, delights in cruel discoveries. Lady Vivian Hartwell found it one quiet morning, her fingers searching for a misplaced bookmark and instead grazing against the ridged seal of deception. The parchment crackled like betrayal itself as she unfolded it. The words within were written in Zayden's unmistakable hand, each stroke of ink precise and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who never faltered. Yet what those words confessed could not be softened by elegance. To the treasurer of the Crown, all arrangements are confirmed. The estates remain under private protection until further notice. Let the Tun believe what it must. Ruin will serve its purpose. Inform no one of this deception, not even my steward, not even— The last line broke, unfinished. But it did not need to continue. The meaning was clear as glass, and twice as sharp. The Duke of Penhurst had never fallen. Vivian's heart, steady until then, began to tremble. The room seemed to tilt around her. The silence of the library pressed like water against her ears. All this time, the humiliation, the whispers, the sympathy she had offered with trembling sincerity, all of it had been built upon a lie. The coins she had given him, her last offering of trust, had been unnecessary. Her compassion, her courage, her belief that kindness might save a broken man, all of it mocked by a deception he had crafted to amuse himself or test the world. Her hands shook. The letter slipped from her grasp and fell onto the marble floor, its edges curling like wounded flesh. She stood frozen, the firelight trembling across her pale face. Behind her, the door creaked. "Vivian." His voice was soft, careful, as though he had entered a dream he did not wish to disturb. He had come to find her, perhaps to confess, perhaps to forget, and instead found her standing in the very ruins of his truth. She turned slowly. Her eyes were dry, though her voice was not. "How long?" she whispered. "Were you going to let me believe you'd lost everything?" The stillness between them shattered like glass. Zayden saw the letter at her feet, the broken seal gleaming in the light, and his composure, that polished armour he had worn all his life, cracked. "Vivian," he began, stepping forward. She recoiled, a tremor of disbelief in every breath. "Don't. Not now. I have listened to every word you spoke, trusted every silence you offered, and believed you were a man undone by misfortune. But it was all theatre, wasn't it? Your ruin, your pain, your need, all scripted for an audience of one." He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me," she demanded, voice trembling but unbroken. "Tell me what it was like. Tell me why you humiliated yourself before the world only to make a fool of me." He drew a slow, shuddering breath, running a hand through his hair as though he could tear the guilt from his scalp. "Because," he said low and raw, I wanted to know who would stay when the gold was gone. Every smile I ever knew was false, every affection borrowed against my fortune. I needed to see if loyalty could survive without wealth to feed it. She stared at him, heart breaking anew. And did you find your answer? His eyes, once hard as steel, softened in defeat. Yes. He took a hesitant step toward her, voice trembling. I found you. Vivian's composure faltered, a storm breaking beneath her stillness. Then why hide it from me? She asked, tears finally spilling. Why let me think you were a man betrayed when you were the one playing betrayal itself? Because I didn't plan for you, he said simply. His words fell like confession. The lie was meant for London, not for you. I wanted truth, not pity. But you walked into my farce and turned it into something real. You gave me kindness I didn't deserve. And by the time I realized I was no longer acting, it was too late to stop. She shook her head, backing away until her skirts brushed the bookcase behind her. You deceived the world, Xaden, and I could forgive that, for the world is cruel and deserving of your revenge. But to deceive me? Her voice broke. That is something I will never understand. He reached for her hand, but she stepped aside, trembling with quiet rage. The gesture hung in the air, unfinished. Vivian, he said softly, you must believe me. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could control this, that I could end it before you ever became part of it. But then you offered me your last coin, and everything I thought I knew about myself collapsed. Her tears fell freely now. I thought you needed saving. I did, he said fiercely, but not from ruin. From myself. The truth cut through the silence like lightning, bright and merciless. Vivian pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breath. Do you hear yourself, Xaden? You lied to everyone you've ever known, and now you call it salvation. His eyes closed, pain flickering across his features. No, I call it punishment. I thought I could use deceit to find honesty, and somehow in doing so I lost the only honest thing I ever found. Her sob caught in her throat, soft and wounded. You speak as though love excuses everything. He stepped closer, voice trembling. It doesn't excuse it. It condemns me all the more. Because I would rather have lost every coin, every title, every speck of reputation, than lose the one thing I never thought I'd have. And what is that? His answer came without hesitation, like breath. You. The word lingered, fragile and absolute. Vivian's heart stuttered painfully, torn between fury and the undeniable truth she saw in his eyes. She wanted to scream, to strike him, to forgive him, all at once. But she did none of those things. Instead, she turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. You have a talent for words, Your Grace, but I no longer know which of them are true. He reached out again, but his hand fell uselessly to his side. Then let my silence speak for me, he said softly. She paused at the threshold, tears glimmering in her lashes like pearls against flame. You fooled the world, she said, her voice trembling but clear. But I was the only one who believed, and that is what makes it unforgivable. The door closed behind her with the gentlest of clicks, and for the first time since he had orchestrated his grand deception, Xaden of Penhurst stood truly ruined. The letter lay upon the floor, its ink glistening beneath the dying firelight, proof of pride, punishment, and love entwined in one cruel confession. And I, dear listener, can only sigh as I dip my quill in ink once more. To deceive the world is forgivable. To deceive the one who believed, never. It began, as all tragedies in London do, not with lightning but with laughter. The Tun delights in two things above all others, the rise of their idols and their inevitable collapse. Thus, when whispers began that the Duke of Penhurst's ruin had been but a ruse, society pounced upon the revelation with ravenous delight. It started in the drawing room of Lady Harcourt, that gilded temple of gossip where secrets are devoured faster than tea cakes. An anonymous note, written in a hand too elegant to belong to a servant, arrived upon her silver tray. Within it, one damning line: "The Duke of Penhurst's coffers never emptied, only his conscience did." The room froze. Then came the sound that chills even the most righteous hearts: laughter. It rippled from one powdered face to another like the clinking of crystal, sharp and merciless. By supper, every ballroom knew. By midnight, the city itself seemed to hum with scandal. The Duke's noble experiment in truth had become the ton's favourite deceit. The same people who once toasted his fall now jeered at his fraud. And poor Lady Vivian, gentle, trusting, already bruised by betrayal, became the unwilling centrepiece of this cruel carnival. The counterfeit Duchess, they called her, London's most charitable fool. When the whispers reached her, she did not weep where they could see. She endured the ridicule with a dignity that broke every heart that still dared feel. But that night, beneath a moon drowned by fog, she packed her trunk, folded her last letter of farewell, and vanished from the city that had devoured her name. I am told she left in silence. A single carriage rolling through rain-slick streets, the sound of its wheels drowned beneath the clamour of the ton's laughter. Xaden awoke to find her gone. The note she left was brief, but its words struck deeper than any blade. "You once taught London how to lie, my lord. I will not teach it how to forgive." For a moment, I am told, the proud Duke simply stood at the window of Penhurst House, the dawn painting his reflection in shades of ruin. Below, the city glimmered, 1,000 candles mocking him with their brightness. He had thought himself untouchable, a master of pretense who could control even the narrative of his own disgrace. But now the story had turned upon him, written by hands far crueler than his own. When he emerged days later at a charity ball, uninvited, unwelcomed, the crowd parted, not from respect but discomfort. For the first time in living memory, a duke had become a cautionary tale. "Your Grace," Lady Harcourt cooed, her fan fluttering like the wings of a vulture. "I hear your fortune has been most resilient." Xaden's smile was cold as winter steel. "Resilience," he replied, "is the only wealth one may keep when all else is wasted." The orchestra faltered. No one dared meet his gaze, yet the whispers began anew, creeping between painted lips and jewelled fans. He lied to win a heart. He deceived for amusement. He has lost both. Even the servants of Penhurst, once loyal to a fault, began to look away when he entered the hall. The household, once reborn in light, dimmed into shadow again. The gardens wilted. The laughter that had filled its corridors became memory. Fortune returned to his coffers. Yes, his accounts restored, his lands reclaimed, his power intact. But no gold could fill the echo she left behind. He dined alone now, the opposite chair forever empty. He read her name in every newspaper column, for even in her absence she had become legend, the lady who gave her last coin to a fallen duke and left him bankrupt in heart. One afternoon, I found myself standing at the edge of the park, watching him walk alone through the mist. His steps were measured, his coat impeccable, yet every inch of him spoke of desolation. Passers-by whispered, some in pity, others in triumph. "That is Penhurst," they murmured, "the man who lost what money could not buy." When I approached him, purely for professional curiosity, of course, he paused only briefly, hat tipped in courtesy. "Will you write of this too, Lady Whistledown?" he asked quietly. "I write only what the world demands to read," I replied. "Then tell them this," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Tell them I would trade every coin I ever hoarded to undo one moment of her pain." And with that, he walked on, the proudest man in England, reduced to silence by his own truth. As the season turned, his absence from London's gatherings became its own form of presence. Every ball without him felt smaller, every whisper about him louder. The ton moved on, as it always does, feeding on new scandals, yet his story lingered like perfume after a storm, too heavy to forget, too tragic to dismiss. In the quiet of his estate, I am told he keeps her shawl draped over the chair by the fire. He reads her final letter each night, not for comfort, but for punishment. The servants hear him walking the halls long past midnight, his footsteps echoing against marble floors once built to impress, but now serving only to mourn. Society, of course, loves nothing more than a downfall dressed in diamonds. They will forget her tears before the next debutante season ends. But not him. The Duke of Penhurst has become London's favourite ghost, alive, but only barely. He no longer attends Parliament. He declines invitations, even those sent by the Queen herself. When asked why, his steward once replied simply, "His Grace has discovered that some prisons have no bars." And so, gentle listeners, the tale stands thus. The man who played ruin for sport found ruin in truth. The woman who believed in him fled to keep his name untarnished, while he remains to bear the laughter meant for them both. They say London forgives everything, Sam, in time. But I, ever the sceptic, find myself doubting that forgiveness can reach as far as love betrayed. For though gold fills his vaults once more, though power bows once again at his door, something far greater has fled from his possession. Fortune returned to his coffers, yet his heart lay bankrupt still. There are moments, dear listeners, when even the proudest men must face the mirror of their own undoing. For the Duke of Penhurst, that reckoning arrived not in the halls of Parliament, nor beneath the chandeliers of London, but in the quiet rain that fell upon a lonely orphanage at the edge of the city, the very place his own deceit had driven the only woman who ever believed in him. The Ton, of course, has already written its own version of his ruin. They tell it as farce, a duke exposed, a fortune unmasked, a mistress of mercy turned martyr. But truth, as ever, prefers quieter company. And it was in that silence that Xaden Penhurst, once the envy of every man and the desire of every debutante, walked barefoot through the rain, stripped at last of every pretense that had built his name. They say he left his carriage miles away, dismissing his driver, dismissing even his title. No crest, no coat of arms, no guards. Only a man in soaked linen and shame, crossing the muddy streets as thunder cracked above him. Within the orphanage walls, Lady Vivian Hartwell worked by candlelight, her gown plain, her sleeves rolled, her hands steady though her heart still bore the bruises of London's laughter. The children loved her, not for her gentility, but for her gentleness. And though she smiled when they called her Lady Hope, there were nights she wept for the man who had destroyed her belief in love's honesty. That evening, as the rain began to fall in earnest, she was reading aloud from a worn storybook when a child at the window gasped. "A man, miss," he whispered, eyes wide. "There's a man outside without a hat." Vivian frowned, closing the book, and turned toward the door. She stepped into the courtyard, the rain slicking her hair, the wind sharp against her cheeks. And there, standing in the downpour as though the heavens themselves had summoned him to judgment, was Xaden. He looked nothing like the Duke she had once known. The fine lines of privilege had softened into exhaustion. The arrogance that once clothed his every gesture had been replaced by something raw, unguarded, human. His hair, darkened by rain, clung to his brow. His eyes, once full of command, now brimmed only with apology. "Vivian," he said, her name barely audible over the storm. She froze. "Your Grace." The title slipped from her lips out of habit, brittle and distant. He shook his head slowly. "No titles. Not tonight." She took a step back. "Why are you here?" He did not answer at once. The silence stretched, punctuated only by rain striking stone. Then, as though his knees could no longer bear the weight of what pride remained, he sank before her. Not with the grace of a man performing repentance, but with the collapse of one who had run out of lies. The sight was too terrible, too intimate. The Duke of Penhurst, the man who had once made London bow, now knelt before a woman he had wronged beyond forgiveness. "Get up," she whispered, trembling. This is madness. It is truth, he said hoarsely, and I have hidden from it long enough. Her breath caught. You should not have come. You have already taken everything. He lifted his gaze to her, rain mingling with the tears he would not let fall. I ruined myself to find honesty, and found it in you. The words struck her like a blade and a benediction both. Honesty, she repeated, her voice breaking. You call this honesty? To trick the world, to trick me, only to arrive at the truth when it no longer matters? He bowed his head. I deserve every word you speak, but I cannot bear another hour knowing that I broke the only soul that ever saw me for what I was, not a duke, not a fortune, but a man unworthy of love. I came to kneel, not as Penhurst, but as Xaden, the fool who mistook pride for virtue. The thunder rolled again, echoing through the stone walls around them. She wanted to turn away. She wanted to run back into the warmth of the orphanage, to forget that she had ever loved him. But something in his voice and the quiet, desperate sincerity rooted her to the ground. You think kneeling erases deceit? She asked softly. No, he said, eyes never leaving hers. But it is a start. And if forgiveness is beyond me, then let me live with the knowledge that I have finally spoken the truth. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet pouch, the same one she had once emptied into his hand before the court, when she thought him a ruined man. It was heavier now. I returned your coins, he said quietly. Every one you gave me. But what they carried, your kindness, your faith, I can never repay. She stared at the pouch, untouched. Do you think gold repairs trust? I think it confesses what I cannot say without trembling, he said, that your gift was the first moment of honesty I had known in years. You gave without hope of return, and I repaid you with humiliation. Her eyes shimmered, not with weakness but with the terrible ache of recognition. He continued, voice breaking. Every day since you left, I have lived in the echo of your absence. I walk through Penhurst and hear your laughter in every corridor. I dine alone and taste the silence you left behind. I thought wealth could buy truth, but all it purchased was my own damnation. Stop, she whispered, though her tears betrayed her. You cannot undo what has been done. No, he agreed, but perhaps I can become the man you believed I was. Lightning flashed, and in its pale glow she saw him for what he truly was. Not the duke, not the deceiver, but the man stripped bare of title, fortune and facade. A man willing at last to crawl through the rain for redemption. He bowed his head once more, his voice trembling against the storm. If you cannot forgive me, then let me serve. Let me build, repair or labour beside you. Let the tongue call me mad. I would rather be mad with truth than sane in falsehood. For a moment all was silence, the kind that exists only when two hearts remember what it is to break. Then she moved toward him, slowly, carefully, as though afraid the moment might dissolve if she breathed too hard. She reached out, her hand trembling, and rested it atop his rain-soaked hair. You are a fool, she murmured, but perhaps not beyond redemption. He lifted his eyes, stunned. This is not forgiveness, she warned, voice soft but unyielding. It is mercy, and mercy, Xaden, must be earned anew each day. He nodded, unable to speak. The rain softened, the wind gentled, and for the first time since London's cruel laughter began, the Duke of Penhurst, stripped of every illusion, found peace not in triumph, but in surrender. And thus, dear listeners, we see that even the highest born must bow when love demands its due. Pride may purchase status, deception may purchase survival, but neither has coin enough to buy absolution. Even a duke must kneel when pride has spent its coin. There are evenings, dear listeners, when London forgets its cruelty, when the chandeliers seem to glow not from candlelight, but from the heat of redemption itself. Such was the night when the Duke of Penhurst, once the subject of mockery and ruin, returned to the very court that had banished him in laughter. The royal gathering at Clarendon Hall glittered brighter than ever. Gold-trimmed mirrors reflected gowns like rainbows and eyes like daggers. Every noble who mattered was present, and many who did not were desperate to be seen pretending they did. It was meant to be another night of empty compliments, waltzes rehearsed to perfection, and whispered alliances forged between teacups and deception. No one, not even the most gossip-hungry among the ton, expected a storm to break beneath the chandeliers. Until the doors opened, he entered not with the arrogance of a duke, but with the gravity of a man carrying the weight of his sins. Xaden Penhurst, tall, solemn, and unmasked, walked across the marble floor in silence. His coat was black velvet, his cravat undone, and in his hand he carried no gloves, no cane, only a single letter, folded and sealed with the mark of his house. The orchestra faltered. The waltz dissolved. Fans stilled mid-snap. Even Lady Harcourt, that tireless collector of other people's downfalls, froze mid-laugh. Gasps rippled like waves across the room. "He dares show his face," someone hissed. "After deceiving all of London," another murmured. But Xaden walked on, each step echoing like a confession. He did not bow to the Queen. He did not offer smiles to those who pretended not to know him. Instead, he stopped at the very centre of the room, beneath the great gilded dome where months before he had declared ruin upon himself. And from the crowd's edge, a quiet movement. Vivian. She had come only because her new patron, the Duchess of Arbridge, had insisted the orphanage's benefactress must attend. She wore pale blue silk, simple yet luminous, a gown chosen by modesty, but betrayed by the soft light that adored her. The sight of her brought a hush that no royal decree could ever command. Xaden turned toward her. For a moment, the great hall, all the jewels, the titles, the whispers, ceased to exist. There was only him and her, history burning quietly between them. "My lady," he said, voice steady, resonant, "I have come not as a duke, nor as a man worthy of pardon, but as one who has learned that truth is the only crown worth wearing." A ripple of discomfort passed through the court. The Queen herself arched an elegant brow, intrigued. Xaden continued, his gaze fixed on Vivian, though his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Months ago I deceived London, and in doing so, I deceived the one heart I should have cherished above all. I pretended to lose everything, to test whether love or loyalty could survive without gold. But I see now that it was I who failed the test, I who measured virtue with arrogance and affection with vanity." The courtiers shifted, unease curling through their ranks. Never had such naked confession dared cross the marble floors of royalty. He reached into his coat and unfolded the letter, the same one that had begun his ruin. "This," he said, holding it high, "was the lie that began it all. I sent it to hide my wealth, my name, my truth. And now, before this court, I destroy it." He tore the parchment clean in two. The sound echoed like thunder in a cathedral. Vivian's breath caught. The crowd murmured, stunned. Xaden turned to her once more, his voice lowering to something only she could feel. "Vivian Hartwell, you gave me your last coin when you believed I had nothing left. You gave me compassion when I deserved contempt. And you gave me honesty when all I offered was disguise." He stepped closer, the space between them trembling like a heartbeat. "Before this court, before London itself, I ask not for forgiveness, but for faith. Faith that I may prove my love by truth, not pretense." Then, before anyone could stop him, he went down on one knee. A duke kneeling before a lady of modest birth. It was the most scandalous act of devotion London had ever seen. Gasps scattered like shattered glass. The Queen leaned forward, her fan lowering ever so slightly. "Marry me, Vivian," he said, voice breaking. "Not out of duty, not because the world demands spectacle, but because when I was stripped of everything, I found myself kneeling, and found that I never wished to stand again unless it was beside you." Vivian's eyes glistened, the room blurring around her. Every cruel whisper, every sleepless night, every wound carved by betrayal melted into the air. Her heart, cautious and bruised, beat loud enough to drown the world. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Xaden, when you lied, I hated you. When you repented, I pitied you. But when you knelt, I saw the man I once believed you could be." The crowd held its breath. Her gloved hand lifted, delicate, resolute, and came to rest upon his cheek. "Rise, Xaden, for I will not have my husband kneel before me, but stand with me." The hall erupted in a single stunned silence. Then applause. Soft at first, hesitant, then thunderous. The Queen's lips curved into a faint smile. Even Lady Harcourt dabbed at her eyes with a lace kerchief she would later swear was due to allergies. Xaden rose, his eyes never leaving Vivian's. The relief, the love, the raw humanity that shone there struck even the cruelest hearts to silence. He took her hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles, not in possession, but in reverence. "Before witnesses, before the world that mocked us," he said softly, "I ask again, will you be my wife, not by scandal or circumstance, but by choice?" She smiled, not the shy, uncertain smile of a woman overwhelmed, but the radiant peace of one who has seen both love's cruelty and its grace. "By choice," she whispered. The crowd gasped again, softer this time, reverent. Xaden turned then to the assembly, his voice strong once more. "Let it be known," he declared, "that I have nothing left to hide. My wealth, my title, my pride, they mean nothing beside her truth. If that truth condemns me, then so be it, for I would rather live in ruin with her than in splendour without her." The Queen rose, her jewelled hand lifting in quiet decree. "Then let it be known," she said, her voice carrying across the marble floor, "that love, when honest, redeems even a duke." The crowd bowed. The orchestra struck a single trembling note, then another, weaving into a melody that felt more prayer than song. Vivian leaned toward him, whispering through the music, "You kept your promise, to find honesty, even at the cost of yourself." He smiled, tears mingling with laughter. "No, my love, I found myself at the cost of dishonesty." And as they began to dance, slow, deliberate, the world forgotten, I felt my quill tremble in my hand. For in that golden hall beneath the glittering eyes of every cynic and skeptic, London witnessed ruin turned to reverence. Ah, dear listeners, what sweeter irony than this, mammas, that London, so fond of scandal, should end its season whispering of love instead. For the tale of Penhurst, once born in deceit and downfall, now concludes in harmony and grace. The house that echoed with ruin has found its rhythm again, not through wealth or titles, but through laughter, the rarest currency of all. Penhurst blooms anew beneath a gentler sun. Its marble halls, once chilled by pride and empty splendour, now hum with music and mirth. Servants move through its corridors smiling, no longer fearing the tempers of nobility, but basking in their kindness. The gardens which had withered under grief have burst into life. White roses climbing the terrace, lilacs perfuming the evening air. Even the fountain, long silent, sings again. I hear the Duke himself restored its waters on the morning after his wedding. He claimed it as symbolic, though some say the truth lies in what followed, that his Duchess, our dear Vivian, knelt beside him, sleeves rolled, laughter ringing as they worked together to set the pump in motion. Imagine that, listeners. A Duke and Duchess, hands muddied, hearts lightened, the emblem of humility blooming where vanity once stood. Their first ball as husband and wife was unlike any London had seen. No ostentatious displays, no gilded arrogance, only joy, pure and disarming. The invitations bore a single line, "All are welcome, even those who once whispered." And they came, oh how they came. The lords who had mocked his ruin, the ladies who had pitied her shame, the same courtiers who once fed upon scandal now arrived dressed in apology, their diamonds trembling beneath the weight of remorse. But the Duke and Duchess received them all with the elegance of those who no longer needed to prove their worth. The ballroom shone like a dream. Candles reflected in polished glass, violins weeping soft melodies, and the scent of jasmine drifting through the air. When the clock struck 9, Penhurst entered arm in arm with his bride, no crown of arrogance upon his brow, no armour of indifference around his heart. He looked at her as though every vow he had ever spoken lived anew in her gaze. Their dance began in silence, a waltz slower than memory, steadier than forgiveness. She moved as though born of grace itself, her pale blue gown trailing light across the floor. He followed her lead, not with dominance, but devotion. Every turn was a confession, every touch a prayer. I confess, even my ink trembled as I watched. For I have seen countless unions of convenience, passion, and power, but never before a union of redemption. The tongue, accustomed to whispering, now watched in silence. The Duchess's laughter, once mocked as naive, became music to every heart present. The Duke's gaze, once feared, now softened the sharpest of tongues. It was said that when the Queen herself rose to toast them, even Lady Harcourt's fan ceased fluttering long enough for her to dab discreetly at her eyes. "May your truth endure where your pride once failed," Her Majesty declared, and the room thundered in applause. Penhurst bowed, but it was Vivian's hand he kissed before all others, and the crowd, which had once relished their downfall, found itself reborn in reverence. From that night forward, Penhurst became more than an estate, it became a legend. The Duke opened his lands to the orphanage, building new wings under his wife's guidance. Children once forgotten by the city now filled those halls with laughter. On certain evenings, when the weather turned kind, Londoners could see from the road the sight of their Duchess reading aloud to the children in the garden, while her husband stood a pace behind, smiling in quiet awe. And though London will forever whisper, for that is its nature, its tone has changed. The tale of deceit has turned to one of devotion. The jesters now speak of loyalty, the cynics of grace. One might think this writer immune to sentiment, having chronicled every heartbreak the city could produce. Yet even I confess, there was a tenderness that night no ink could quite capture. For when a man who once faked ruin to test the world finds true wealth in love, it is not merely his redemption. It is society's own reflection made better. Still, I cannot help but smile at the quiet twist of it all. London's grandest duke, undone by his own deception, found his salvation not in cleverness but in sincerity. And his Duchess, the woman who spent her last coin without thought for return, now reigns over hearts far beyond her title. This morning, as the carriage bearing their graces rolled through Grosvenor Square, the crowd parted not with envy but affection. A flower seller tossed a white rose upon the cobblestone, crying, "For the lady who gave her gold and kept her soul." Vivian leaned from the window, took the bloom and placed it in Zayden's lapel. "A reminder," she told him softly, "that love once purchased in pain blooms everlasting." He smiled, his eyes glimmering with that same mixture of reverence and awe that first silenced London's cruel tongues. "Then may we never spend it carelessly again," he replied. And perhaps, dear listeners, therein lies the final lesson. Redemption is not the undoing of sin, but the choosing of grace, again and again, even when the world is watching. Tonight, as I close this chapter, the moon hangs over Penhurst like a silver seal, blessing the house that rose from ruin. The music drifts faintly from its windows, the melody of second chances. I can almost hear their laughter echo across the city that once condemned them. And though I have written of dukes and dowagers, betrayal and bravado, none have ever stirred this chronicler's heart quite like the lady who gave her last coin to save a fallen man, and the man who spent eternity repaying her in devotion. Thus ends the tale of the lady who spent her last coin, and the duke who paid eternity in return. So tell me, gentle listeners, do you believe redemption rewrites every sin of pride? Whisper below, and await my next revelation.